Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for From Transaction to Transformation, Rethinking Fundraising for Creative Organizations, presented by Laura Hennighausen with Purpose Possible. I am Lisa Smalls, Director of Arts Access and Learning at South Arts, and I'm joined by my colleagues Hillary Crawford and Helena Halley Selassie. I am an African American woman with long black curly hair, wearing blue glasses with multicolored specs, a white shirt, and a denim jacket. Before we begin, I'd like to offer some helpful tips for today's session. To turn on captions, click the Show Captions button in the meeting controls. If needed, please choose the language for the captions if it's different from the default. Please place all questions in the Q&A pod. We want to reserve the chat for interactions with the slides and for conversation and connection with the group. A recording of today's webinar will be housed on South Arts' YouTube site, as well as in the South Arts section resources on our website. Registrants will also receive the link and today's presentation materials via email. Lastly, please use the link in the chat to complete a brief survey to help us better serve the field's needs and interests. I'd also like to acknowledge our partners at the NEA. South Arts empowers artists and arts administrators by expanding access to professional development opportunities. Our free Arts Admin webinars offers timely topic-driven sessions that respond to the evolving needs of the field, providing practical tools, insights, and industry best practices. South Arts receives support from the National Endowment for the Arts through a partnership agreement to produce webinars such as these and conduct additional programs for our constituents across the region. Please visit our website as well as the NEA's website for additional information and opportunities. And now I'll turn it over to you, Laura.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I am happy to be here talking to you guys about fundraising and specifically about individual fundraising today. My name is Laura Hennighausen, and I am the Director of Strategic Philanthropy at Purpose Possible, which is a firm based in Atlanta that works nationally with fundraising, succession planning, and strategic planning. And then I also am the CEO of a nonprofit organization known as Arts Capital Atlanta, which is advocating for increased investment in the arts in the Atlanta metro region. If you'd like to, I'd love to see where everybody's from. If you want to drop your name and organization and location in the chat so we can see who's in the room. We are going to have a couple opportunities for folks to kind of chime in the chat, and then I'll also be pausing for questions throughout the presentation. So feel free to enter your questions there as well, and we'll get to those soon. Perfect. So, the reason we are here today is to talk about fundraising, and most importantly, we are talking about individual funding. And this is exactly the reason why we are here to focus on individuals. This is some data from the Giving USA report, which is a national report on philanthropy that comes out from the Lilly School of Philanthropy in Indiana and an organization called Giving USA. And you can reference this report at any time. I recommend you look at it each year. But it gives you a summary of giving from the previous year. So this is from the most recent report, and this would be reflecting giving in 2024. And as you can see, out of all of the sources of contributed income, individuals is by far the largest source of income out there available to us as nonprofits. Individuals, give in a lot of different ways. They can give multiple times a year. They can give through individual monthly giving. They can become members. There's a lot of different ways to engage individuals, which we'll talk about today. Foundations, interestingly, only make up about 19% of overall giving. This is nationally. So although we often think about writing grants as being kind of the first step or something we should really be focusing on, it's not the entire end game. Really, individuals are key. Again, corporations is even smaller, and corporate giving has been decreasing year over year. I think that when we see this report next year, this section will be even smaller year over year. Lots of folks or lots of corporate groups are changing their giving now with the new tax bill, and we're seeing some CSR departments shrink. And then bequest. Bequest is when someone leaves money in their will or estate that goes to a nonprofit. So essentially, that's also individual giving. It's just when individuals have passed on and are still directing their dollars. So this is always really important when we want to focus on how to fundraise for our organizations. Individuals is really where we need to lead. And the difference between fundraising and development, which is part of what we're talking about here today, is that fundraising is very transactional, if you think about that. Whereas development is a more relational opportunity for you to get to know the people that you're working with and build a longer term relationship with them. So right now, we are in a volatile funding environment. Government funding is very unpredictable. Corporate giving is tightening. Foundations are more cautious and slower than ever. But individuals continue to give, although they do sometimes give selectively. So our question is really or the question is not how do we raise more money, but how really do we build durable relationships that people want to sustain? How do we keep folks with us for the long haul to make sure that we can sustain our programs? An interesting fact, this came out in a research study in 2023. 57% of donors, when asked, indicated that they donated because they care about the person who asked me to donate versus the organization. So it's a fundamental shift in how we think about fundraising, or how many of us might think about fundraising, especially as we're just starting out. If you're new to the sector, we think of, doing our annual appeal and posting things on social media and asking kind of a wide range of folks, anybody we can get in front of, when really to get to those larger, more sustainable donations, we need to do longer term work, more of the development. We are developing relationships versus just fundraising. So, just as I said, fundraising versus development. Fundraising is very transactional. It is me asking you for something, you giving me the money for what I need, and then we move on, right? Whereas development is really focused more on relationships. Fundraising focuses on things like campaigns, events. So a lot of our like galas or special events that might really have a lot of folks that come in and they might donate once and then you never see them again, never hear them again. Those are one-time asks. They often have deadlines or goals. So Georgia Gives Day, things like that. That is more fundraising focused. But you have the opportunity to identify people within those events and then move them into more of a development relationship workflow. So development is really focused on building trust, engagement over time. So you want to keep folks with you as long as possible. You want to focus on your shared values. You want the donor to understand and relate to your mission and see how they fit in. And you really want to think about their donor experience. So, what is it like for them when they first donate? What happens next? How do you keep in touch with them? And we'll go over some strategies for that in a little bit. Fundraising, again, is often reactive and time bound. So, if you think about when you receive a fundraising appeal from an organization that says, SOS, we're in trouble. We need you to help keep our doors open. And you might donate, but then a year or even a couple months from now, you see that same appeal again. Like they are just going out when something's on fire or everything always seems super, super urgent, time bound. We need this right now. Development is thinking more strategically on the long term. So planning out what your asks are going to be, planning out how you're going to engage people over a longer term, and making that a fuller picture. For fundraising, And again, with these success metrics, they're both important, right? So when we think about our fundraising success, we might think about the dollars we raised this year. Did we make our budget? How did we do? Where development, you want to kind of also bring in some of these success metrics. So, for example, what is the donor lifetime value? How long has, John Doe been donating to our organization? How much has he donated over the course of all of those years? And has he upgraded his support? Have we been able to engage him in other ways? Those metrics are really important when you're thinking of things from a development point of view versus a transactional fundraising point of view. So I'll pause for a second. Does anybody have any questions so far about, what we're doing? Does this all make sense to everybody? You can do a thumbs up. If anybody has a question, feel free to put it in the chat. Excellent. Okay. Again, feel free to jump in anytime. So one important thing to think about for all nonprofits, average donor churn. So that means the average number of donors that you might receive donations from in a year and then you don't hear from again. So those folks that kind of slip through the cracks, maybe are a one and done, that is about an average of 40, in some research, even up to 60% of individual donors might donate and then not come back to you. But you can adjust for that, right? And the way I like to think about this as we are thinking about our fundraising, we think about moving donors into a pipeline and keeping them. We want to keep them in that pipeline. So if you are not really focused on donor stewardship and things in the development point of view, you're really working with leaky buckets, right? You have segments of folks where they are slipping through your fingers. You might be doing just as much work and oftentimes even more work, but they're not sticking with you. And that is a big issue. And we know this because in research, we know that retention beats acquisition. And that means that it is easier and cheaper to keep donors than it is to go out and find new ones. So obviously, we always need to be doing both. But this is a good point to stress that donor stewardship, keeping folks with you, is extremely important. So it is on average, it costs organizations, nonprofits, $1.50 per dollar. So and for acquiring a new donor. So we are actually spending more money to acquire the donors for their dollar than what we're receiving in return. Does that make sense? Whereas if you are working to keep a donor, on average, it's just 20 cents per dollar raised for keeping a donor. So it is literally, research shows us it is cheaper and more worth our time, more effective to focus on keeping our current donors rather than always looking for new ones or just doing these kind of blanket asks. Small improvements in retention can dramatically increase your revenue over time. And again, like I said, if you think about that leaky bucket or leaky faucet, our biggest missed opportunities aren't new donors, they are lapsed donors. So they are folks that have already initiated, they have already indicated that they are interested in your mission, but they're slipping through your fingers because you're not doing enough to keep them with you. So I'm curious, and we can throw this in the chat too. Is this something that you track? Do you guys right now track your donor retention? Um, how much are you thinking about that, I guess, in the day to day? And I see in the meantime, if you guys want to throw that in there, I see we do have a question right here. Can I speak to the pros and cons in comparison and investment trajectory for fundraising versus development? I think this is maybe exactly it. It is extremely more worth your time and investment to try and keep the donors that you already have and to try to do that and then upgrade them, right? You're going to have more success in asking somebody that already has a relationship with you to upgrade and maybe contribute more often than going out and having to find new ones. So it's a big thing. You should be doing both. Um, We can absolutely share some of the research when you guys get these slides. There's a study that is linked right in this slide that speaks to that. But there's a variety of studies, and I can share some more as well that speak to that. They usually say, I mean, the numbers vary, but they say on average, acquiring a new donor costs about 5 to 10 times more than retaining. So everything I've seen, rule of thumb is it is more worth your time and effort to focus on retaining and stewarding donors. All right. So when we think about donors, what actually makes people give and how do we get them to stay? So if you think about, and I often encourage us to think about ourselves and our own giving journey, right? If we are contributing to an organization, there's oftentimes a lot of reasons why we might do it at first. It might be rage giving, it might be in reaction to something that's happening nationally or internationally. It might be that somebody is asking you that you have a relationship with. It might be that it's something you really feel passion for. And then it's also helpful to think through the different also motivations. So maybe that's what gets people to donate first. But what are they really interested in their donation? Is it that they want to feel close to the people that they're helping? Is it that they have more maybe of like an engineering mindset and they want to understand how they can do the most good with the money that they are contributing, how they can maximize that impact? These are all things that are different for everyone, but are very helpful for you to learn about and understand for your major donors in particular, but as many donors as possible. And you learn that through conversation and getting to know them better. So donors often they want to feel seen, they want to feel effective, they want to feel aligned with what you're doing, they want to understand the values, they want to understand how they can feel like they are enacting their values through contributing to your cause. And they want to feel trust. They want you to trust them. And they also want to be able to trust you as nonprofit administrators. They want to know that their money is being used for the things that they set forward. If it's general operating support or a restricted purpose, they want to be able to trust that it's being used the right way. Typically, what we see that does not motivate folks is that, again, constant urgency. The house is on fire, the roof is on fire, we need help right now. If that, and that's hard to avoid right now in some cases, but if that is something that is consistently happening, then you are going to lose some of this, right? You're going to lose a little bit of that trust. They might start to wonder, well, why is this constantly an issue? Even though we all know often fundraising is a constant issue. But they might, have some concern about how things are being managed. So be careful with that constant urgency, emergency. Um, Guilt does not motivate donors long term. It might at first, but that's not going to keep them with you. And I don't think any of us really want to guilt our donors into supporting us. We want them to want to support us. Generic impact language, that would be, we've helped 100 people and they all got to go and attend this class, something kind of large that doesn't really speak to the individual impact. And we'll talk about what does work in a second to this point, but that kind of just really blanket statement that doesn't maybe excite them. We need to think a little bit more about this in more of an ethical storytelling, marketing kind of point of view. What is going to get somebody really excited? And then the other thing, and this is one of the biggest issues that we see with folks in fundraising, is donors don't only want to hear from you when you need money, right? They don't want to just receive something from you at year end each year. They want to have more communications. A lot of the research is showing that folks want very often communications. I'm also seeing, interestingly, that some of the Gen Z actually are preferring to receive mail. So sending out paper letters and appeals might become more common again because I guess it's more of a novelty at this point to receive something in the mail that's not just a bill. But people want to hear, they want to know what you're doing throughout the year. And so it's important to also make sure in your fundraising journey and your stewardship journey, that you're building in opportunities to share about what you're doing, exciting developments, here's some pictures, here's a video, things like that, without asking for money at that same time. You should make sure you kind of are doing a balance of asking and then just sharing newsy things that people might find interesting. So what does work? Exactly. Specific stories over abstract impact. So if you can, depends on what your mission is. But if you can have maybe an individual write some testimony or talk about why the work that you do is really important to them and how they've benefited, that can really go a long way. Anything that you can do to identify or describe some of the people that you're working with, again, maintaining those ethical boundaries. You want to make sure that that's okay with the person that you're talking about or showcasing. But anything that can make it feel more human, more personal, so the people reading about it feel like they can kind of relate to those that are benefiting or participating in your classes, whether it is that you're training new curators or choreographers, or you're working with kids, or you're providing art resources. Maybe you provide, um, let's say, recycled art supplies, something like that. You can really think about how to make that more human and more exciting and relevant to folks reading about what you're doing. Consistent communication, we just talked about that as well, but making sure that folks are hearing from you more often, not just once a year when you're asking for money, that you are communicating with them regularly, and also I would say through multiple channels if you can. So your donors should get your newsletter. You would want them hopefully to follow you on social media. You might send them a letter. You might send them a handwritten note. You might shoot them an email personally. There's a lot of different ways to do that. And it's helpful to sit down as you're beginning your year planning and think about what are the different ways I might want to engage with our donors. And that might be, advisable that you segment them. So you think about, I have major donors, I want to make sure we talk to them even more often. So we're going to do some handwritten notes to those folks. To our new donors who have maybe given us $50 or less, we are going to do XYZ and think about how to kind of get them into that pipeline and bring them through. Transparency is the next thing on what does work. Transparency is so important. And that is something I think a lot of us struggle with because it's scary, to be honest. It's scary to talk about how difficult it is in running an arts organization, right? But if none of us ever talk about it, if we don't make sure that folks understand the realities of fundraising and keeping our programs going, then they're not going to know why it's important that they support us, right? Transparency, even when things are hard, is very important. We want to make sure that folks understand, hey, we had an NEA grant and it went away. Or, maybe we were able to do this program in the schools. We're no longer able to do it this year. This is why, and explain that. So folks really feel, again, like there's trust there, that you are being open and honest with them. They understand what the actual needs are, and then they can understand how they can help fulfill those needs. And the last thing here is invitations, not transactions. So there is also a study, and I'll make sure I link this somewhere when we send these out to you. There is a study that talks about how donors, they asked two different groups of folks. One group, they were asked just to donate to a nonprofit that they've already donated to. So, hey, you're a friend of ours, can you donate? The second group was asked, hey, can you volunteer? We'd love you to volunteer here. This is what we need. And then it also said, if you cannot volunteer, we would really appreciate a financial contribution at this time. And of those two groups, the folks that were just asked to donate, and then the folks that were asked to volunteer and then donate if they can't volunteer, that second group that was asked to volunteer first donated more. They donated larger amounts, they donated more because they wanted to help. They might have felt a little bit of this guilt, but it's not something that's happening all the time. That's not always the tool you're using. But they wanted to help, and they felt like You were giving them an opportunity to get more deeply involved, to really participate in a different way. And even though they couldn't, they still contributed. And then plus they also got some volunteers from it. So it's a great opportunity, a good thing to keep in mind that there are a lot of different ways. Invite folks to an opening or an exhibition or a presentation, get them to come behind the scenes, offer them different types of opportunities to engage so they can go become even more excited about the work that you're doing. Any questions? Again, if you have any questions, please feel free because we're going to jump in now to my little cycle of philanthropy diagram. Let's see. So many of you may have seen this before. Some of you might have not. If you have ever taken a class on fundraising, you probably have. And this is what we call the cycle of philanthropy. This is essentially the pipeline of where you want people to be as you are doing individual fundraising, although foundations, corporate giving, all folks kind of fit into this. It's just maybe a little shift in your thinking. Often when I've seen this chart, I see that all of these little sections are equally spaced. So they're all the same size. I have gone through and really tried to make it look more intentional around where actually your time and effort should be placed as you're working this in. So I'm going to talk through a little bit about what this is and then why it should matter to you. So the first part, we really enter the cycle here and identify and qualify. This is what I call, this is like, and I'm going to compare all of this to dating, really. These are personal relationships, right? Even though you're not typically dating your donors, I hope. But in this case, so identify and qualify. This is when you might first be meeting someone. Maybe somebody is setting you up. Maybe somebody has introduced you to someone. Maybe you've met them on an app. Maybe, all the different ways you can meet them. So the first thing you have to do when you're fundraising or when you're entering a relationship with anyone is you need to identify who that person is, right? So this could be looking at prospect lists. It could be asking your board to come up with a list of people that they think are potentially good prospects. And then the next step for that is to qualify them. So you might have a big list, you might have a bunch of people to look at on an app, but the qualification is when you're really sorting them and deciding, are they a good prospect? Are they a good fit for you? And if so, you can kind of rank them. Like this donor, this prospect donor might be a really good prospect for a major gift. We know through a qualification process, this is when you're doing a little bit of research on folks too, maybe some background conversations, some Googling, looking at what else they're doing. If their name is like on the side of the High Museum, then you might know they're a good prospect for you. So qualification, you might segment them into major donors, unknown. This person might be a trustee at a foundation. You're kind of figuring out the lay of the land here. And that is also so that you can understand how best to enter into this next stage, cultivate. This is your dating period. So you've met someone, you've decided they're worth your effort, at least to begin with. And now you're going to cultivate them. You are going to date your donor, essentially. You are going to invite them to events. You are going to share more information. You're going to tell them about yourself. And you're also going to ask them about themselves, right? You want to get to know them. You want to see what the possibility could be between you and the organization, the donor. You want to take that time to really think about how you want to maybe take it to the next step, if they're a good fit for that, right? So cultivation and this is bigger, right? This is a longer time period because your cultivation, you're not going to propose when you first meet someone. You want to take some time to really get to know each other and make sure that when it does come time to pop the question or to ask them for a contribution, that they feel engaged enough in you and your mission to consider that request. Does that make sense? So here's where I'm going to ask you guys again to type in the chat. I'm curious, what sort of cultivation activities do you currently practice right now at your organizations? What sort of things are you doing as you are getting to know donors or prospects? How are you bringing them in to learn more about your mission? Any ideas? Okay, yeah. Invite potential donors for a site visit, a behind the scenes, or a rehearsal. Exactly. Invite them to events. Take them to lunch. That's great. If you really think somebody is a great prospect, especially for a major gift, taking them to lunch and getting to know them, or taking them to coffee, or having them come over with coffee to see your site, that's great. Um, and then creating awareness with our team so that they also include them. That's really important. So, one thing that I talk about a lot with boards, this is something you can talk to your board about. And I think that this chart, the little cycle, is important and helpful for them to see because lots of times when we think about fundraising, we immediately are thinking about this, right? The proposal, the solicitation, the big ask. And that scares people. That scares board members. That scares your other staff. It scares many fundraisers, right? Like that's a big deal. But it's important then to look at the cycle overall and see there's actually, it's the smallest piece. That is the smallest part to fundraising is actually doing this ask. There's a ton of other space where your board members, where your other staff can be engaged in the process and help. They're still helping with fundraising by practicing, participating in cultivation, participating in stewardship, as we're going to talk about in a second, doing the identification and qualification. That is, friend raising. That's bringing some folks to the museum or to your dance performance to see and learn more about the organization. Those are all really important and helpful stages of the cycle and ample opportunity for folks to get involved there. So I think, yeah, these behind the scenes opportunities, something like that that feels, kind of really cool, like gives them access to something that you might not otherwise have. So we've gone through identify and qualify. We found the people we want to date. We've decided they might be worth it. We've spent some time cultivating them, getting to know them better, letting them know us better, having them really understand the mission and our work. And now we're popping the question. We are making a solicitation. And of course, it depends on the type of donor prospect and how you're going to make this proposal. If it is somebody that is a lower level donor, somebody you don't know as much, or you're not really sure about their interest or their ability, solicitations often happen in newsletters at Georgia Gives Day or at your state giving day rather. Those opportunities where it's more of a not a little less personal, right, of an ask. But if you know that they have potential to be a major donor, somebody that would give at a significant level for your organization, that level is different for each organization. But if you think that there's really something there, that's when you also really want to do something more personal, right? You want to take them out to lunch and then ask them to contribute to your organization, or you want to send them a handwritten letter or something like that. So there's again different ways to do the solicitation. And if you have the time and ability, it's really helpful to think through, look at all of your donors, look at who's in your pipeline, and then make decisions around what sort of way you would want to ask them and also what you want to ask them for. Maybe during this cultivation time period, you figured out that so and so really loves kids' dancing programs, or so and so really likes to work with um, seniors. And so then okay, well, I'm going to ask that person specifically to contribute to our new senior initiative. Like you want to do that matchmaking and make sure that you're asking them about something that they can get really excited about supporting. And it might be that it's more personal than or more targeted than what you're asking everybody else for. So that also helps them feel special, right? You're giving them an opportunity to participate in something that's going to further their values, their goals, make them feel great. But again, that's the tiny little piece. And then the last piece, and that is what we're really talking about too today, is stewardship. So, stewardship is, if you think about, our dating analogies here, you've dated, you've popped a question, you still have to keep the romance alive, right? You need to keep people engaged. You need to continue dating even after you're married. You need to make sure that they have opportunities to learn even more about you, to get more deeply involved, to get more excited about the relationship as you continue it. And then also, hopefully, increase their support, increase their donation, or bring more people in. So, the reason too, this is a cycle. It doesn't end. You want to keep people within this. So you're dating them, you're asking them, you are thanking them throughout the year. You are making sure that they feel heard and appreciated. You are doing your thank you calls. You are sending thank you impact reports. You are reporting back on what specifically their donation might have done. You are naming them on a donor list. Whatever you might do, there's a lot of different ways, and you should be doing multiple things. But every donor really should know that you've noticed their gift, that it mattered, and that you would talk to them even if they never donated to you again. Even if you have to break up, you're still going to be friends, right? They want to feel, because then they might come back eventually when circumstances change. Maybe they get a different job, something like that. You still want to keep them in the cycle. So you steward them. And then at the turn, maybe the turn of the next year, whenever it is, you are going to look at your donor list again. You're going to see who has already been donating to you. You're going to identify some new people. You're going to qualify. You're going to segment them into different lists depending on who they are and what they're interested in. And then you're going to date them again before you ask them for another gift. So, and this is also to say that you are doing a lot to be in touch with your donors throughout the year before you're asking them for money each time. So they feel like it's not just transactional. They're not just an ATM to you. So curious, does this all make sense? And also, are there some stewardship practices that you already engage in? And they might be that they are very similar or even the same as your solicitation, not your solicitation, sorry, your dating, right? Your cultivation steps. You might do some similar things here. You might still be taking them out on a date, bringing them behind the scenes, doing that sort of thing. But this is something that often is forgotten about. We don't always do a great job of trying to keep the romance alive when we should be. And so this is super important to remember. So, in the chat again, if you'd like, are there any specific stewardship practices that you engage in that have been successful for you? Anything that you've done that has really helped get people to upgrade a donation? Let's see. I give small, meaningful gifts to show my appreciation to our top sponsors and donors. That's great. Yeah. Opportunities to give something in return, and also always think about making sure it's balanced. You don't want to spend a crazy amount of money on a thank you gift if that might come across to the donor like, why are you spending all the money on a thank you gift, right? But opportunities for swag, opportunities to give them something that helps them showcase the fact that they support your organization. That's free advertising. That helps bring more people into the organization. Opportunities for behind the scenes things. Personalized artwork. That's amazing. Yeah, that's really cool. If you work with a constituency too that can participate in putting something together in a thank you package. So I've seen like organizations that work with kids. They have the kids all come together and design thank you notes or something that you can use as your stationery to your donors. Little touches like that are super important and really make an impact. Let's see. We invite donors to an exclusive pre-performance lounge. with snacks and drinks, and they get to mingle with staff and choreographers. That is super cool. Opportunities again for like extra special access is very, very cool. Sometimes it's a little harder to pull off depending on your mission, but those things really do a lot. People love feeling special in that way, right? Let's see. Erin says she takes notes about personal things like birthdays, kids' names, kids' college, and engage with them throughout the year. And then, yeah, send them personal emails with photos. It is a super nice touch. Like, let's say you have a newsletter that goes out. Maybe you forward, even though hopefully they're getting your newsletter, you also forward it with a little personal, like 2-line little note to your donors. Hey, thinking of you, wanted to make sure you saw this article. Or I think if you do know things like birthdays, that's always wonderful to remember, because again, these are relationships. You want them to feel, and you want to be genuine in that. Like, I hope that we actually are interested in what our donors are doing, what they really care about, and why they're here, so that we can keep that conversation going and build real trust-based relationships. This is also such an excellent place to identify potential board members in the future. If you get somebody that you can engage and they get really excited about the mission and they're showing up to events and they're supporting you, that might be a natural board member for you. So that's also something to think about as you're looking at your cycle. Take them up on invitations whenever possible. Say yes when they invite you into their world. I think that's beautiful and that's wonderful too. They people want to feel like they're interesting, right? People are interesting. But people want to feel like you care. And again, if you remember that statistic I shared very early on in the presentation, people give when they care about the person asking. So the more you can build a relationship with your donors, the more they are going to respond to you as a person and not just around the mission. Perfect. And Frank also had a great suggestion to make sure you're also thinking about ways that you can engage distant donors. Maybe you have some folks that aren't in town and can't take advantage of those times to come early and participate in a lounge and snacks and things like that. But maybe there's something extra special you can send those folks in particular so they feel seen and engaged, even though they might not be able to take you up on every opportunity. Okay, so bit of a recap. Grants, right now especially, are competitive. They are more competitive than ever. We are also seeing that we are at, I think, the highest percentage ever of grants or foundations that are going invitation only. So it's going to become harder and harder, unfortunately, to secure grants. If you already have a good pipeline of those and you have great relationship with the foundations, that'll go a long way. But I would encourage you as you're thinking about all of these things, you're dating, you're cultivating, you're stewarding, do the same thing with your foundation staff and trustees. If you can build a relationship with them, be transparent, be honest, get to know them, get a good understanding of what they are dealing with. It's often really interesting to ask foundation staff about how, like, what their day-to-day is at work. Like, how do they deal with all of the applications coming in? What are the decisions made? What is the process? That can be a really fascinating conversation. But again, opportunities to build personal relationships with your grant funders are going to be really important as we navigate the next couple of years. So again, grants are competitive. They're often restricted, so they are not as flexible as sometimes a lot of individual giving is. And grants are often short term. So foundations might tell you you can apply this year, you can't apply next year or the year after, then you can apply again. Individuals don't typically do that. Corporate giving is often tied to profits and PR. They are using that as a method for marketing and making sure that folks see their values at play. But since it is really often tied to profit and also with the new tax changes coming in, I think that we'll see some shifts in corporate giving and we'll see some folks really move those dollars into marketing, which means that They're going to typically favor larger organizations that can return the best ROI, get the most eyeballs on their logo at their event. So it's a little more vulnerable in downturns. It's a little more sensitive, not so consistent. Um, but that's something to, think about. And then federal funding is political, as we know, always political, but especially right now. It's slow. I know a lot of in Georgia, some of our grants that we see, even locally or at the county, can take 6, 8, 12 months to receive the funding from. So you have to be able to kind of sustain that in the meantime. And as we see right now, federal funding is uncertain. It's not something that we can really rely on or count on necessarily. And so that's all going to tell you that individual giving is kind of where it's at right now. There's flexibility, there is speed. It's a lot quicker for an individual to be able to cut you a check. They can offer often more unrestricted support. They might understand better why you need unrestricted support. And again, if you build a relationship, it can be resilient. It can weather all of these different changes and even really benefit you. If you have donors that care about your mission and understand how you might be impacted by a change at the NEA or at the state level, then oftentimes what we hope to see is that they'll rally around you, right? They want to make sure that you stay and weather the storm. I see I have a question about the tax changes. So there's a variety of different things going on, and I can send a really simple write-up that summarizes this that you can keep. But if you guys remember last year, the One Big Beautiful Bill was passed, and that enacted several tax changes that are now going into effect since we are in a new year. Um, a variety of different things. One is that individual donors can now take a universal deduction, and the limits are increased. So it's $1,000 for individuals, $2,000 for family, I believe. Really, what that means is that there is a tax incentive now for lower level donors, the folks that don't usually itemize their taxes. They have more incentive to contribute to charity and to track that. The challenge, and there's a good article right now on Gail Perry that talks about this. The challenge is that a lot of folks don't know that. So they might not be making extra donations because they don't understand that that would really benefit them in the end on their taxes. So that's something for us to look at. Corporate wise, we are seeing that now I think I'm going to say this wrong, so I will send you the article so I don't. But basically, what's happening at the corporate rate is that it is less incentivized for them to contribute to charity. There's the first 1% is I think no longer tax deductible. And oftentimes corporate average rates of charitable contributions are at 1% of their profit. So if that's no longer really an incentive for them, then to be contributing to uh, nonprofit organizations, what we think we're going to see is that we're going to see a lot less in corporate giving. Um, and there's also a little bit of change for our major donors, major individual donors. Their tax rate is changing a little bit too. So we're just seeing a lot of shifts where we see that major donors might start to do things like bunch their gifts. So they might give more in one year and then skip a little or not give as much the next year and kind of play around with some of the amount that they're contributing at any one time to really maximize their tax benefit. I think you're only going to really see that though with like really high level major donors that are paying attention to that sort of thing. And yes, I will definitely send several different things. I'll embed a bunch of different links in the slides so that you can access that. Hannah says, I've read that donors don't respond well to the tax benefit messaging and fundraising. How can we inform donors of the tax benefit without pushing them away? That's a great question. And I think what the research says is that folks aren't motivated purely by the tax benefit to donate, right? Like nobody's going to go out and really contribute money to an organization just because they might get a tax benefit. You might see that just in like super duper high level donors, and they'll probably just move some money into a donor advised fund or something to take advantage of that. Um, but yeah, that is usually never anybody's top motivation or even in their top three motivations for making a gift. What is important though is that they understand that there are changes to the laws, right? And so I think what we want to do is we don't want to lead with, hey, you should contribute to us this year because you might be eligible for, a deduction or something like that. But we can make sure that maybe, once or twice a year or something, we are sharing an article like the one I'll send to you guys that just gives a really good overview and a brief level around what the differences are and why they should pay attention and keep those receipts. Make sure we are sending those receipts, but that they should keep them so that they can use them for their tax advantage. So again, it's not part of our solicitation, definitely not part of like the donor dating, the cultivation, but it might be a nice stewardship moment or within the beginnings of your relationship just to make sure that they have access or that you have linked to it somewhere so that that's an option. One thing that we are seeing is that in large part, donors of color, people of color, have less access to understanding about the new tax laws. um, there is, I think, a lot of that probably has to do with what financial planners are doing and who has access to financial planning in those ways. But we want to make sure that everybody has the same equal understanding of what those implications are and how they might benefit from them. But again, I will send plenty of links. Okay, so our core takeaways here is that development really is a long game, but it compounds. It is worth the effort. It's cheaper. It is often will result in a larger win for you as an organization. Retention is the most underutilized growth strategy, making sure you're hanging on to those lapsed donors or reactivating them after maybe you don't hear from them for a year and then you really, you're still sending them information about the programs, sending them a little I miss you message, something like that. Bringing them back in the fold is super important and is worth your effort in the long run. And so that all of those thank you notes, things like that, asking your board maybe to help you write thank you notes, that is not optional. That is not like an extra nice little touch. That is really strategic. That is a strategic decision that you are making to invest in stewardship. And again, individual donors, as we see, are our most stable funding base. We saw in the very beginning of the presentation, 66% of charitable giving came from individuals last year. I think that that'll grow even more over the next year. And so that is really where we need to make sure we are putting some time into. Don't give up on corporate, don't give up on your foundations, but make sure you are putting your efforts into individual giving. So some next steps that you could do, as you're thinking through this, I would recommend you sit down at some point and audit your donor journey. And that means like think through a donor comes in, maybe you've never heard of them, and they donate $20 on your website. What happens next? How are they thanked? How are they engaged? Are they automatically added to the website or are they to your newsletter? Are they receiving any sort of personalized thank you or invitation? Like, think through those different journeys. If somebody comes to you and immediately donates $1,000, how is their journey a little different? Are you doing different stewardship and cultivation efforts with them? Um, let's see, you want to identify your top 20% of donors and map relationships. So if you haven't done any relationship mapping, that's a really great exercise. And again, something you can and should engage your board in is looking through your list of donors. I would recommend you pull a list of like the past 3 years of donors and then see who knows whom. So maybe your board member is like, oh, yeah, that person was my neighbor or something like that. It's important to identify those relationships so then when it is time to send a personalized thank you note or invite them to an event, you can leverage that. You can say, hey, board member, I want to invite so and so who happens to be your neighbor to come join us. can you help me with that invitation? Can I CC you or can you send it? Chime in. Those are really important opportunities. So make sure you're doing your relationship mapping. Um, Definitely commit to a stewardship standard and don't give up on it. So that might be that you're going to say, okay, every time somebody donates, our team will send a written acknowledgement letter within 7 days of receipt of their donation. And then 30 days in, we're going to send, I don't know, something else, our impact report or something like that. But map out goals and times for you to meet and then really stick with them. Look back at that, every couple months, maybe once a quarter, and think, are we keeping up with these stewardship opportunities? Because again, super duper important. And then, yeah, shift your board conversation. So we often will sit our boards down and, we want them to help us in identification and qualification. We want them to help bring in new donors, but it's also, I think, equally, if not more important, to ask them, who should we know better? So let's look at the donors as we're doing our relationship mapping. Who on this list do we think um, is a really good prospect for potentially a larger gift? Or who do we know has a really good relationship with somebody super important in our community and we want to cultivate that? Figure out who those folks are and then engage your board in that kind of work. And often board members will appreciate that because it feels more fun and a little less scary than just figuring out who are we going to ask for money. This is an opportunity to build relationships, to get to know each other. Um, so yeah, let's see. I have one last thing for you guys in the chat, and then we can go more to questions as well. But I'd love to hear from you about one thing that you're going to do differently with your donors in the next 30 days. Like what's something you want to either start practicing or come back to and start engaging. Could be that you want to have a new donor newsletter or that you're going to send your top 20% of donors a handwritten note, whatever it might be. But I'd love to hear. And if you want to share so other people can also take some inspiration from you. So put that in the chat. And in the meantime, I have a question from Linda. Are there other ideas for developing new donors? Invite to an event, ask board members, look at ticket buyers, other ideas. Yeah, I think all of those are great. One of the things that I do often, especially if I'm, prospecting for major donors, is to look at who is donating to similar organizations, other arts organizations, I would say, in your community. And you can find that information by looking at their annual report or on their donor wall or on their website. You can identify good prospects there. Identify folks by I don't know, there's good opportunities. Like if you have the opportunity to go speak in front of a group, like, I don't know, Kiwanis, or maybe there's some sort of homeowners association or your neighborhood association, always go to the neighborhood association for the nonprofit that you work for. So like wherever that location is, if there is a neighborhood association or something similar, that's a great place to go and make sure you're giving them updates every once in a while about what the organization is doing and how they might participate because they're already right around you. They might be really looking for something to do. Oftentimes there's new people that are new to the community. Those are great opportunities. But yeah, if anybody else has ideas on how to find some new folks too, please feel free to put them in the chat because I think there's a lot of opportunity out there for us to find folks. And I think that we're seeing people are really hungry for opportunities to feel like they're doing some good right now. So it's a great time to really lean into that and encourage folks to share, and then make sure that they feel very thanked when they do contribute because every little bit helps right now. Let's see. We are a new organization running on volunteers with one or two small grants. In the next 30 days, I will be onboarding these ideas with our board and mapping this out with our development committee. This was super helpful. Yeah, when you are new to fundraising, it feels a little intimidating at first, and there's a lot of like frameworks and strategies and charts and graphs and things you can think about. But also, try don't to overcomplicate it. Because again, like if we go back to our dating analogy, these are things that we're all already doing and familiar with. It's just thinking of how to kind of apply that to fundraising, right? Like, how do we bring people in? How do we engage them? How do we get them to fall in love with our nonprofit? And then how do we keep them? So, yeah, these are great opportunities. And it's a really good time, I think, in January to think about this for the year. Like what, and again, don't overcomplicate it. You don't have to be sending communications each week or even each month. You could make sure that you're sending something once a quarter or something like that. But whatever is something that you can be consistent with, that's the main important thing. Don't over commit to something that you're not going to be able to keep up with. Awesome. Well, great. Does anybody have any other questions? I'm going to put up, this is my email. Feel free to email me with any questions. I will make sure that the South Arts folks have these slides and I will attach or I'll embed some links to the relevant articles and research that I talked about. I will make sure that you get the exact information on One Big Beautiful Bill because I probably might have said a little bit of that off a little bit, but I will make sure that you guys have the right information because it is important, even for us, as individuals, we should understand what's going on there. Let's see. I see that Joanne plans to schedule time with individual donors, at least twice a week. That's a great big goal, but that's excellent, even if it's just a quick phone call or a note. I would love to activate our board members in stewardship. I want to create a system where I can ask the chair or vice chair to reach out to new donors in addition to our team. Yes, I think opportunities too at your board meetings to actually sit down and do some work instead of just listening to a report or something like that. But passing out some stationery that's already addressed and they can just write a little note and a thank you on there. Things like that are nice. And then people feel like they're actually getting something done rather than just listening to a financial report. That's always great. Fairly new to fundraising, so I appreciate the info and reframing. I'm going to push us to dedicate more time to relationship mapping and increasing your stewardship efforts. That's great. Yeah. That's if this the one thing you guys take away is just don't let the romance die with your donors. Keep it fresh, keep it fun, and really, use this as an opportunity to get to meet new people and build relationships. Yeah, volunteering is really helpful. Any software or apps you recommend for donor mapping? One of the easiest things I do with my boards is I will take a list of donors. I don't usually include how much they gave or anything like that because a lot of that is also kind of personal or sensitive, but I'll just get a list of our donors and then throw that into a Google form with a little like checkbox next to each name and then send that to our board members or staff and ask them to go by and like click anybody that they know, click the little button next to them, and Google Form will automatically spit that into a spreadsheet. So then you can look and see who knows whom in that way. That's like the easiest way to start it. From there, if you do have a CRM, I would make a note in your CRM saying, oh, this is board chair's neighbor, something like that. That can be really helpful. But I think like the bare minimum, the easiest thing and the most helpful thing is just throwing them all into a Google form or something like that and have it auto populate because then you can refer back to it. Awesome. Perfect. Well, I really appreciate everybody's time. If you have anything else, please make sure you guys fill out the information that the South Arts folks are putting in the chat here. There's a survey, so we'd really appreciate that. But again, yeah, feel free to reach out anytime if you have questions, and I look forward to to talking with you. And I really hope that, you do some great stewardship and you build some new lasting relationships.
All right. Thank you, Laura. That was very informative. There was a lot of information. So I just want to remind everyone that you will receive a link to the recording as well as the slides that will also include those additional materials that Laura has said she would give. And the link will also be housed on the South Arts YouTube channel, where you will find this and all of our past recordings there. So if there's something else that you may need assistance with, you can look through there, watch a webinar. And again, please fill out the survey so that if there are any additional topics that you would like to have, we can line those speakers up for you. Again, I am Lisa Smalls with South Arts, and I thank you for spending time with us this afternoon, and we will see you next month. Bye.